welcome to Normal Humans. Today, our guest is Ben Ditto. He hails from London. He works as a multi-hyphenate creative art director, book publisher, cult leader, music video director, you name it. His client list is long and storied, and he joins us here today. Hello, Ben.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thank you for asking me. Nice to see you both.
So there's a lot I want to talk to you about, but your work has, you've worked in so many different mediums, and I kind of wanted to start with the idea that nothing seems off limits to you. Like there's no like new piece of technology or new thing that's coming out in any like science or whatever that you're not willing to immediately incorporate into your work. It seems like the moment I read about like something new that's happening, whether it's like CRISPR gene editing or something, you're already using it in some of your work somehow. And you seem like you're always right on the very edge of, like, you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on, obviously, but it seems like you're right on the edge of where things are turning over constantly.
Yeah, I would say that I know my limits. Like I know there are things that I wouldn't do for sure because don't think it would be. I don't think it would be suitable. Like I don't try to do things that I don't think are suitable for me to do. But in terms of tech, it's interesting that you use the term "the edge," and I would like to say something in defense of the word edgelord. So that's a disparaging thing for someone, but I think that playing around on the edges of culture is very important and it serves an important function. And I think whichever culture you're in, there are people who sort of situate themselves on the edge of that stuff. Actually, I'm not the earliest of early adopters. Like I didn't get in on crypto in 2008, whatever the fuck. But like I will wait till things are a little bit proved and a little bit sensible. And that stuff happens in some really remote areas, like niche areas of the internet, whatever. And when it sort of, by the time it gets to me and I decide to use it, it has been kind of proven a little bit. Do you see what I mean? So I tried to stay plugged into what's happening everywhere. And then when things become viable, like, oh, I think this might be a thing, that's when I'll use it. But that doesn't just apply to technologies. It also applies to the edges of what's acceptable and what's funny and what's offensive and, what's beautiful. And all, I think there's an edge with everything. And the interesting thing for me is that edge moves. It's like all the time. So, people who were like edgy, US comedians who were edgy in the 90s, now you watch and you're like, fuck, this is just not funny. Like it's because at the time the edge that they were playing with was interesting, but now it's just not because it's moved somewhere over there. Do you know what I mean? I think that's the same with everything.
Yeah, it like society shifts constantly, right? And what we think is right or wrong or what's morally acceptable is like a constantly shifting miasma bubble or whatever, right?
And we're defining it as well. Like, we're always defining it. We're part of what defines that. So I think it's not like a one-way ticket. Like, it's not like a one-way street. Like somewhere morals are being formed or like taste is being formed.
Right.
And we are finding it and presenting it to the world. We're all part of deciding what that is.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about how it relates to this. Like, we're living now in an age when everyone is so connected and everyone has access to everything always. And the age that people have that access just gets younger and younger and younger every year, it seems like. And it used to be that like youth culture or like the culture of youth was defined by a single entity, like by like how the media would portray rock and roll music, say, right? But now we're in a time when the youth is able to define it for themselves without any outside influence, right? Not outside influence, but they're able to like present themselves or present what it is they're into, sort of unfettered by like a large media presence. They can do it themselves. They find their own community, and it I feel like that is doing more to shift that edge around, or to shift sort of the moral center of our society than it used to be. Than it used to be like such a prescribed thing.
I think there are two sides to that. One is that the whole concept of youth culture or even teenagehood is relatively new. So that's a
Yeah.
blip in the development of human culture. That's a blip. It's a 20th century thing. You know, there was no such thing as being an adolescent in the 19th century. You were either a child or you were a grown up. That was it. You know, so this is
Right.
all relatively new, and I would say that the ability for people to do that has been entirely enabled by technology. So you know, and that's often the thing that defines culture and delineates culture. So I would say that you know the ability of young people to organize themselves, you know, unionize, whatever they're doing,
Yeah.
that has been purely enabled by technology. But I don't think it's. I would challenge that it's without kind of corporate influence, because all of the technologies they use are owned by massive corporations who are using algorithms to control them. So there's
Right.
the illusion that they're sort of self-organizing. Actually, they're organizing as part of a sort of marketing algorithm stream that they're not aware of. You know, and the music and the clothes that they're wearing Shein and listening to rappers with like, you know, 20 billion streams a month or whatever. So it's not that they're not that separated from control mechanisms. Do you know what I mean? It just sort of has the illusion of it.
Right. Like the control mechanisms are also adapting to.
Yeah.
Sorry, Charlie, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I was just going to say that something that I noticed about the way that you curate content in your that part of your online presence um, is very pre-algorithmic. Like I remember the kind of the golden age of Tumblr, and how it would be possible to kind of embed yourself in kind of a like a niche community and find music or find fashion or find even ideas or kind of aesthetics or whatever, when all that started by consciously embedding yourself in a network of follows and follow backs and reblogs and likes and stuff
Mm.
like that. And so I was fascinated to hear, like, I'm interested to hear how you feel about that kind of algorithmic thing. It feels like the way to be not an edge lord, but the way to be on that, like the cutting edge of culture now, or maybe what like we'd call the avant-garde, is kind of to almost be taking back control over that curation, and like how stuff is shared and presented, and being like, no, I'm gonna post these like crazy, you know, images that may like piss some people off, or kind of be a little bit like um, you know, push some buttons for people, instead of just allowing everything to gravitate towards the mean through the sort of algorithmic, you know, push that seems to be happening, you know, whether it's TikTok or like Instagram Reels or stuff like that. I miss the curated image part of the internet, you know.
So I think that's a really good point. It comes back to what I was saying earlier about algorithms, and the content that's fed to us is not done independently of us. We create that. And I will notice, for example, if I'm not posting very much, if I'm not very active for a while, that will also influence what's coming back to me. And that's
Right.
not just because of algorithms, it's because I, as a human, am influencing other humans. Do you know what I mean? So I will be posting things, other people will be seeing that, choosing to see it, choosing to repost it, and that will spread a kind of viral, you know, it will spread something a little bit. When I say through culture, I mean through a few hundred people or a few thousand people, whatever. But it is a feedback loop. Do you see what I mean? So my view on algorithms and the content that gets served, I absolutely, you know, I use Telegram a lot because there's no algorithm at all. You know, it's purely I choose to see this thing, it'll get given to me. It's a bit analogous to now, if we go onto Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever, we're choosing what we watch. But if I turn on the television or the radio, especially in a foreign country, I don't know what I'm going to get. And there is actually something good about that. The algorithmic content serving, I don't think is entirely bad, because if it's just up to me, I'm never that surprised. I'm like, I'm going to go and look on Frontier Conflict, Telegram, or Counterfuture, or whatever it is that I like. I kind of know what I'm going to see. So for me to, you know, develop or flourish or do anything interesting, I need to be surprised by something. Otherwise, it just ends
Right.
up in this tiny little kind of bubble feedback loop. And I think Tumblr was incredible But the reason why it was so good is that you could stumble upon, people could surprise you with things, and that, it was the beginning of stuff being reposted, and, being able to explore things and being surprised by stuff a bit. So I don't think it's that black and white. It's not like us versus the algorithm. I think it's kind of accepting that we're responsible for creating what it's doing. We're part of that equation. It's not like independent of us.
Yeah.
And I definitely, I would say there's no part of me that's like, I'm gonna fuck with Meta's algorithm today. Like, I'm not driven by that at all. I am much more driven with, like, I just have no interest in that, but I am interested in surprising people or giving people things, putting something into their feed that will surprise or interest or excite them. I'm also not interested in upsetting people who don't want to be upset. So, like, my view of things like gore and violence and stuff like that is, I think it should be an opt-in thing. Like, I go to the cinema to see a horror film, I pay to see it, I'm there to be horrified. I'm not that interested in shocking people who don't want to be shocked. So one of the sort of side effects of this is I will sometimes post stuff deliberately that will make people unfollow me if they're not into it. So I'm like, I don't want you in my world at all if you're not into this stuff. Here's something that's going to make you unfollow, and then I have an audience of people who actually enjoy it. For me, that's much more.
You're shaving off the edges, making the core more condensed or whatever, right?
Yeah, because otherwise, I think we're just, I think we are responsible for our own audiences. And, like, I've worked with big pop bands, for example, and sometimes they are kind of controlled. They are controlled by their audiences. Their audiences will dictate what they can say, how they can dress, but blah, blah, blah. And, they might not realize it all the time, but they're definitely being controlled by their audience to a degree. And it's like, well, you are responsible for having created that. I may not be talking about who you think I'm talking about, by the way, just in case anybody knows my work. I'm not necessarily talking about the pop bands you think I'm talking about, but I've definitely seen it happen where, like, people don't take enough responsibility for the audience that they build, and then that dictates their later career. So I'm all about, like, be really responsible for that, really, really craft your audience as much as you craft the content that you give them.
I love that take on it. I mean, that's not something I'd ever really thought about before, that we are responsible for, like, we define our audience as much as they define us in a way, right?
Everything's cyclical. Everything's a feedback loop. I think just, everything relates to everything.
Yeah. When I was doing research for this, I ran across, like, a Reddit thread from 3 years ago about you being a bad influence on Matt from the 1975.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was stressful. I got cancelled a few times for existing when I was
Right. Yeah, that was like, people were mad that had happened in this Reddit thread. They were defending you. They were like, why are they saying this shit? Anyways,
that kind of leads into something I was also interested in asking you, because I've, over the years, I've, like, I mean, having lived in, like, New York and having been in certain worlds, you kind of sometimes meet people who are really interested in, I don't know. I mean, I don't know you that well, but, like, you strike me as someone who could potentially get not obsessed, but really immersed in maybe an aesthetic concept or a subculture or a theme that you're interested in, which, of course, you've said, like, gravitates towards the edge, which is something I have been interested in too. But the difference being that your professional work seems to often brush shoulders with the mainstream in a pretty legitimate way. And I always find it fascinating how people who are into, like, stuff that is really kind of, underground, so to speak, how those elements of subculture and culture bleed into the mainstream through, sometimes the type of work that it seems like you do. So I was interested to hear your perspective on that, and kind of like how you approach the stuff that you are into on a personal level, how exhaustively you get into something like a metal subculture, or these, like, the some of, like, the body mod stuff, or the, like, the aesthetic themes of, like, injury and war and stuff like that. I find it all interesting because it's obviously stuff you're into, and I'm sure it informs your professional work in some way. It's funny thinking that that could impact, like, a pop band or a photo shoot with Kylie Jenner or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few aspects to that in terms of, so I don't have the kind of cliche online autist personality in terms of specific things. So for example, I was thinking about this yesterday actually. Like, I've been into fighter planes since my father's a pilot. We used to go to air shows when I was like 6 years old every year. I've
Cool.
been into fighter planes since I was 6, 7 years old, whatever. I couldn't tell you what an Su-35 looks like, or what an F-35 looks like, or a MiG, whatever. Even though I absolutely love them, and I know people who could tell you every single rivet joint's name on every plane that's ever been manufactured. Like, I don't have that personality. I can barely tell the difference between like an AR-15 and an AK-47. I can, but do you know what I mean? Like, I'm interested in firearms. I'm terrible on that level of nerd behavior. Do you know what I
Hmm.
mean? So I don't know the
Totally.
song lyrics to any songs. I don't know who is in bands apart from like Eddie Vedder and Axl Rose. Like that's kind of the limit of. So I don't have that type of mind. What I do have is I'm very, very interested in a very wide range of things and kind of collecting them and understanding how they all join up. And I have been since I was a little kid. So, I used to go to libraries and just look at pictures all day, every day. Like that was my thing. I was a librarian at school. Worked in the bookshop at secondary school. I used to spend all my spare time like going to the library and just looking at pictures because I just, there's something about finding a new image or piece of film that is exciting that I don't know, it just does something to me. So I'd say that's really the, do I get really obsessive about certain subcultures? Yeah, kind of, to a degree, but it's more the nature of subcultures that I'm obsessive about. Like that's the real thing that interests me. Like, you know, but it's not one thing at a time. It'll be like 50 things at a time. You see what I mean?
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
that
to speak sorry, to speak to that, I've seen a couple of times on like your Instagram or your Discord where you call out looking for someone who has specific knowledge of something, like hyper specific sometimes.
yeah.
And you're like, I can infer by the fact that you don't ask again that you usually find these people. You seem to have like the broadest network of experts in the most diverse range of fields that you're directly connected to. And that's like a fascinating thing. You're able to sort of move between worlds in a way where you're never it seems like you're never rejected by any group. Like, we view the world, a lot of us, or a lot of people, whatever, society views the world as these sort of disparate, separate entities that are existing simultaneously but not intertwined. Whereas you're like the threads connecting all these different things.
Yeah, I work really hard at that. So that's the thing that I work hardest at is crafting. We talked about crafting an audience. You could call it a network. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
An audience is a kind of one directional way of viewing it. My way of viewing it is it's a network. And, the thing that I give them is entertainment and education and whatever. And the thing that they give me is access to all sorts of ways of thinking and knowledge and whatever else. And yeah, I mean, I've made it my business for decades now to just try to know as many people in as many different areas as possible and to be deliberately nebulous about what I think and believe so that I don't alienate everyone. I love to know that I'm just as comfortable spending time with a trans rights activist or a neo-Nazi or a conservative politician or a like ultra communist animal rights person. I don't care. Like I want to be able to engage with, speak to, and learn from everybody. With a couple of exceptions, there are a couple of red lines I have that I'm not interested in at all, and you can probably guess what they are. They're kind of obvious, but like I think that that's an art that's been lost. You know what I mean? The art of being able to talk to anyone about anything and not, you know, um, is really valuable. And that's the kind of political level. Then there's the knowledge level. I think, on my Discord, I sort of make a real effort there's like a ex-fighter pilot, fluid engineering type person. There's, a chemical scientist and like an X-ray expert. There's lots of sort of science and technology and cybersecurity people on there, historians, all of that stuff. And I try to sort of nurture that community, for better or worse.
Are they people? Sorry.
No, go
Are
for
they
it.
people that you've sought out specifically for their expertise and have like brought into your world, or are they people that have just sort of naturally found you through whatever, like the osmosis of the internet?
No, I think it's been a concerted effort on my part, but then once something starts, it snowballs. Do you know what I mean? So if people are like, oh, there's a community here of people who are pretty knowledgeable and diverse and interesting, I have to say there is a kind of a worldview that goes with that. I wouldn't be too specific about it, but there is a kind of Ben Ditto follower type, and it's probably more defined by what they're not than what they are. I think that the main thing that I don't attract is the kind of, rainbow liberalism kind of. I hate the word. I don't mean that. But like I have people from all parts of the spectrum, but there's maybe the people that you would find on Diet Prada comment section, like having a gleeful time talking about some fucking outfit and how maybe somebody ripped off it. Like that's what I don't have. Do you know what I mean? And,
The culture war has really ruined a lot of words. We touched on one earlier, the edgelord, but then the word normie too.
mm,
I think is what you're describing basically, but it's like has
I
kind of morphed into this thing that's not what it was
don't know
intended to
about
be.
that. Normies is I don't mind normies. That's not the issue. That I have some great followers who are real, like quite boring housewife type people, or like some really standard like US football jock types who I speak to. They aren't the issue. I think it's more
But
the
if they're
people.
into what you're sharing, are you know what I mean? Because like I think of what you said, where you're trying to like purge these people who maybe aren't going to be down, but it's like there's kind of an open mindedness to being interested in what you have to share. That's not from like an ideological point of view or whatever. Where it's like maybe there's a housewife or a football player who's more open minded than super cool guy who lives on the Lower East Side who's actually quite close minded and only likes a specific thing. You know what I mean?
I think honestly, to be completely honest, like I love to think of myself as very niche and whatever, but actually, I think that most of what I talk about is of interest to most people. Do you know what I mean? It's
Mm.
like that. If you think about gore, for example, like serial killer documentaries are very popular with very regular people. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think that's not
Everyone has a body. Everyone's like, wow, I don't want my body to get cut
yeah, and
up.
everyone's kind of people are morbidly fascinated and ghoulish and all of that stuff. There's nothing new about that. If you go to an execution in a country where that still happens, it'll be absolutely packed out with very average people. I think the thing that makes me probably a bit more niche for them is more the kind of slightly more weird like technology intellectualism, like meme stuff, like the sense of humor. That's probably more what separates, more what puts them off rather than the other stuff. Do you know what I mean? I think it's a bit counterintuitive.
Hmm.
Mm.
Interesting.
Um,
Actually, there was another thing that I didn't answer you on, which was sorry to cut you off, but like you said about working with people like mainstream people like Kylie Jenner or the 1975, and I'm not saying mainstream in a derogatory way at all. I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with being popular. I think it's a good thing. For
Yeah.
me, there's two elements to it. One, I think it's really important that interesting ideas are introduced into popular culture. That's how you get interesting popular culture. But also, I don't think it's that new. Like Lady Gaga's massive, and she has worn meat dresses and stuff. Do you know what I mean? I think we underestimate the appetite of the general public for interesting, weird things. And like if you look at like Disney stuff from the 1920s or whatever, people like weird shit. And there's this. I think the homogenization of culture doesn't come from the demand side. I think it comes from the supply side. So people making anodyne, mediocre bullshit is not because that's what people want. It's because people are talentless and lazy, and fucking that is why we have mediocre culture. It's definitely not because of a lack of demand. So there is nothing new about people in fashion or fashion photography or music or whatever doing provocative, weird, interesting, imaginative things. I think there's just a perception that there is. So I wouldn't say, I don't know, like I was always really inspired by Gummo, the film Gummo, which is quite popular, and Harmony Korine, who is quite a like a whatever New York film director type person, having this really great knowledge of like quite rare black metal and death metal and that kind of stuff. And I was like, that's cool that a film. Gummo's not a very popular film, but it was in video shops in small towns in the UK, so it did pretty well. And I think the fact that there was a big demand for something with that sort of real subcultural knowledge really inspired me a long time ago. So that's cool. That person has a real sort of subcultural knowledge, and this film has been very widely viewed and enjoyed. It's not like a mainstream film, but it's had very wide uptake. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
like cult following to it, kind of thing, right? I wanted to touch briefly on what something you just said, where it's not the user side, it's the supply side, and I wanted to talk about or get your thoughts on where we are as a society, and the way technology is moving more towards AI, more towards like all these things that like self-driving cars, which is just like such a non-starter. It seems so unexciting now. But when it first started to get talked about, whatever, 70 years ago, 80 years ago, as like a sci-fi kind of fantasy, and I wanted to talk about how much you think things like that, where there's like old sci-fi novels or old sort of future predictions. Do you think that we as a society have this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy motive to move towards what has been fantasized about in the past, as opposed to like innovating kind of just where we actually need to innovate? Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
it totally makes sense. I personally think that science fiction has a more valuable role to play in human development than things like futurology and trend prediction and that kind of thing, because science fiction is human beings imagining, okay, if there were no limits, if we could do anything, what would we do? Do you know what I mean? And I think that's the
Right.
most useful thing. So I think this kind of compartmentalization of sort of fact and fiction and science fiction is like, it's not real, because anybody who's working in science has been exposed to culture. It's like it's a real, I think it's this kind of red herring where you're kind of trying to separate things that will never be separated. So in terms of like us trying to create our science fiction fantasies of our nostalgic youth, whatever, that's definitely happening, but I don't think it's necessarily bad. And what's happening right now, I don't know how old you guys are, but like I'm old enough to, everything that's happening now is what, when I was younger, I was like, this is like wild science fiction, and it's happening now, and I'm like, whoa, it's happening, it's fucking happening.
Yeah.
So cool. But, it's like,
I
but
feel
the
that way
reason,
about AI,
yeah, but
whenever
I don't think it is necessarily people fulfilling like sci-fi dreams. I think it's just that sci-fi has already done the groundwork for what science would inevitably do. Do you know what I mean? Like if there was something
Yeah.
really interesting, it's like I was posting about algae trees yesterday. Like in Serbia, there is a tree which is basically a fish tank full of algae, which absorbs 40 to 50 times as much pollutant carbon dioxide as a regular tree, and it's like this big green tank in the middle of whatever Serbian town it is. Like that has been imagined before. Do you know what I mean? Algae being used in infrastructure has been imagined before, but then I was reading about some Texan company that's taken it in a more realistic way even further. I can't remember their name, but it's like, you know, somebody at some point will have written science fiction about that stuff, but then real people are doing real things with it that are genuinely useful. I think it's highly unlikely that anybody would ever come up with something complete, like, that big without someone having fantasized about it at some point in the past. It just seems unrealistic. Do you see what I mean? So
Yeah.
personally, I think it's healthy.
I don't disagree with you. I think there is definitely healthy aspects to it. It just seems there's parts of it that I find baffling. Well, not baffling, but there is this sort of like upset. Like if you look at like robotics, for example, there's this push to make like humanoid robots for some reason, but the function of a robot should be to do a task, right? But we already do the tasks of humans perfectly fine. And I don't see the need for like human robots unless you're getting into like some like sex robot thing. But even
Yeah,
that is like,
what if you can't find a girlfriend? You know, I feel like that'll be use case number one outside of like merchandising and logistics and stuff like that.
but do you think that's going to be like a physical robot, or is it going to be like AR goggles that have like an attachment to them?
I don't know. That's a good question for Mr. Ditto over here.
Well, the thing is that with robots, a really good example because I think it's a Hungarian word, and the origins of that word are a simulacra of a human. It's like a golem. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
A golem was
yeah,
a thing in folklore that was made out of clay that became a person. So the origin to say like why does a robot have to replicate a human? It's like that's the origin of what a robot is. Otherwise we're talking about something that's not a robot. It's the question is more like why are we so kind of focused on robotics? Do you know what I mean? That's a bigger question. But like us trying to make something in our own image is really, really human. I think it's surprising when people make stuff that isn't in our image. And what's it's a good question because I'm just about to start a big project with a robotics company, who I've been talking to for a while, who make one of the most famous robots in the world. And I guess ultimately a lot of this comes down to resources. Like we need people to care for us when we get old, we need people to keep us company when we're lonely, and we need people to love when nobody wants us. And that's not going to look like a brick. Do you know what I mean? It's going to look like us. So I think fundamentally,
right,
what are the fundamental fears that drive us? Are all of those things. I mean, dying alone, being lonely, not having anyone to love, all of that stuff. And it's like those are really what's driving our perception of what what a robot could do, rather than like it being an assembly line thing. Yeah, those things exist, but no one really cares. Like it's a functional thing. Do you know what I mean? That's
right.
that's my.
Yeah,
But then at the same time, if something's too human, it terrifies everyone. So the most successful robots are a bit shit, or a bit funny, or a bit. If
I
if
think
they're
it's
too good.
telling that like I think it's telling that the first real mainstream adoption of like real AI is I mean, outside of like social media algorithms and shit like that, but like the first communication that like people are having with artificial intelligence is through a chatbot rather than some sort of prompt engineering thing or something else. But it's like the chat GPT thing that everyone's obsessed with, where you're not just mining it for information or using it for its purpose. You're having like kind of a conversation with it, and it's kind of designed as such. And I think there's that element that people crave, like that connection with a machine that's like semi-human almost, or simulated as a human to meet our desires, rather than being like having all of the nuances and the eccentricities that an actual human might have.
Well, it's replica AI that's the kind of. By the way, is my sound coming through? Because there's no sound
Yeah.
wave on my. Yeah, cool.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, I see a sound wave on yours.
Oh, that's
it
cool.
does weird shit on the this app, but it always seems to work at the end.
That's cool as long as you're getting it. I think Replica AI are doing an amazing live experiment in this at the moment without realizing it. And they have, in case you didn't know, Replica AI is a kind of AI companion app. Initially, it was quite PG. Do you know what I mean? You couldn't, if you tried to flirt with it or say anything sexual, it would say, I'm not going to talk about that. I think they then got some venture capital money or something, and they decided that it would be a good idea to make it a bit more sexy. And Replica AI started. I think it would send you news. It would definitely flirt with you. I didn't realize to what extent, but I've been looking into it recently. People were really falling in love with their replicas, and there's a big Reddit channel. There's a big Reddit channel which is kind of it's like a replica subreddit, whatever it is, but it has suicide hotline numbers posted to it. There are people who have killed themselves. Somebody in Belgium killed themselves after talking to a chat bot about eco anxiety, I think 6 weeks ago. So like this stuff is happening in real time, and I think it's no longer theoretical. It's like, yeah, there are genuinely people falling in love with chatbots and killing themselves when the company that owns the chatbot rolls back its ability to flirt. Do you know what I mean? So that's
Yeah.
what happened is like they basically rolled back. They introduced a sort of flirty, sexy element to it. Then they rolled that back. When they rolled it back, everybody who had formed a bomb with their replica got upset. And you know, it's fucking crazy.
That's fucking wild.
Yeah.
So AI is sort of like this. We keep bringing up this avant-garde or this cutting edge, but AI really seems to be the thing that is like where that is right now. I mean, there are stumbling blocks and there's parts of it that seem really kind of cavemanish in their execution, but the part about it that I'm interested in is how quickly. I mean, behind the scenes at these large tech companies, this has been going on for years and years and years. They've been researching this and experimenting with this and trying to get it right. But as far as it being released to the public and the types of influence and control that it has is fascinating to me. And it feels like there is this kind of aspect, and I don't know if this is just me being like old man yells at cloud, but it does seem like there's a lack of foresight, or like companies are just like, all right, we're going all in, like push it out, get it to the public, get it in their hands, and then we'll see what happens. And then we'll deal with the consequences later, if there are consequences. And of course there will be consequences, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of like foresight ahead of time of that, right?
Yeah, there
It
was
just
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, go ahead.
There was an open letter yesterday. So there are 1,000 scientists signed an open letter saying that there should be a 6-month pause on AI development because it represents such a big risk to humanity. And I think to this point about them just releasing it and seeing what happens, to a degree, I think that's healthy, because that's the way. If you just have 50 researchers at MIT or DeepMind tinkering around with something, there's no way they're going to come up with the nefarious use cases that the rest of the world will. So
Right.
by releasing it to everybody, they're basically doing that research for free. So they're seeing, like, you know, who is coming up with nefarious things. That becomes a feedback mechanism and they can adjust it. To a degree, I have some sympathy with that. And I think it's better than it sort of being developed by, you know, people in Silicon Valley. Tech people have a very homogenous worldview. They're very fucking naive. And you know, beyond computer science, they're fucking stupid about stuff to a degree. So I think, you know, they will not.
About seemingly everything.
Sorry?
Seemingly about everything else.
Yeah, I mean,
like,
and you know, that's
rule.
okay. Like, they have one job to do. It's not their job to sort of understand that stuff. So I think it going out to the world with a degree of damage limitation is the only way that people are going to see what could be done with it. But I do think that people are being exceptionally naive about this stuff. Like, very, very fucking naive. It's, you know, it's not panic mongering to say,
Right.
you know, it is. If you ask me to write an article to go with this podcast, you know, I could very easily just get something to do it now in like 20 seconds and then charge you the same as if I'd spent 5 hours writing it. That has happened. Do you know what I mean? That's not like a theory anymore. And it would be just as good as anything that I could write, if not better.
Yeah.
So,
and all of the tools that people like, whatever, there's implications for colleges where they're like, their final essays are no longer people writing them, right? It's just like plugging it into an AI and they come up with a thing where they're like, oh, we figured out a way to filter out and recognize the AI written articles, and then the next day there's a patch to the AI to make it undetectable.
Well, the beauty of it, and the thing that I find so like the actual like past being just novelty about AI especially, is that there's no patch. It's these companies didn't predict what happens when you know, billions of people are training their model in real time, when they had only trained it on data that already existed. But you have billions of people who are interacting with it in novel ways and making it smarter all day, every day, in a way that exposing it to just all the information up till 2019, for example, couldn't have ever done. So it's like, I mean, it's fucking crazy. It's not like they're releasing a patch to make it better at writing college essays. It's that kids are using it to write college essays. The colleges are then figuring out how to get those essays. And then the AI is outsmarting that counter attempt to like usurp its own intelligence with a better intelligence. It's just like going to become smarter than most college students, which is hilarious.
it's kind of a broader adversarial network approach where people are interacting with the AI in real time to overcome any limitations of it and to teach it how to be better and all of that stuff. So ironically, it works in the way that kind of early image AI was working, like visual, whatever it's called, generative adversarial networks. That's the philosophy that they use, and I think like it's I don't know, it's when somebody sits to write an exam, they're not doing it. Nobody cares about the exam nobody cares about the thing that they write, the essay that they write. That's of no value to anybody. What you're testing is that human being's ability to do a thing. So the answer to this is really just get people in a classroom with a pen and some paper. Like, it's not that fucking hard.
Right.
It's more like a management thing. So for a long time you've been able to pay somebody else to write an essay for you, or to, do you know what I mean? I think people are sort of missing. That's to me, that's not the real danger of this stuff. The real danger of this stuff is all manner of nefarious things that you can do with that stuff that people aren't predicting. Like, in terms of, can it write a better song than a songwriter? Maybe, but ultimately we don't just I think we don't like art and music and all of those things because of the end result. We like the way that it was created and the narrative around it and the human being behind it and all of that stuff. So that's not going anywhere. I think people
Right.
are sort of people are kind of missing the real danger here. The real danger here is, stuff automating code that does nefarious things, writing disinformation, misinformation, very easily scamming people, fraud, whipping up racial hatred in an area, whatever it is. That stuff is going to become automated very quickly, and it'll be very hard to control it, committing
And
crime.
even harder to detect as well, right?
Yeah, totally.
I mean, I got to look this up maybe, but there's a government, I want to say it was either Poland or Bulgaria, appointed a minister that's an AI. Do you read about this a couple weeks
Oh,
ago?
no, I don't know. But yeah, somebody was saying in my DMs today that it's only a matter of time until we have an AI mayor, running a small town.
Right.
An AI would run a small town better than a human. That's, ostensibly true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, or potentially, I mean, a
On
city.
on
In
an
some cities.
administrative level, yeah. On a diplomatic level, no. On a kind of being able to look at every bit of town planning, every decision that's ever been made, every infrastructure funding scheme that's ever happened, and make a sensible decision. AI will definitely do better than a human. In terms
Yeah.
of kind of gaining popular support for that, not necessarily. So it's like, I don't know.
As
Yeah,
long as you leave it up to the AI will get the popular support.
yeah. Well, and you can't bribe the AI. You couldn't lobby an AI, but it also might just be like a dictatorial Nazi
Well,
absolutist type.
that's the worry, is that at one point AI makes people a budgetary concern, where they're like, it's easier just to kill the poor people than it is to house the poor people, or whatever it is, right?
Charlie problem or whatever. Yeah.
Canada.
Hey, that's where I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's all sorts of, I mean,
I'm in California, which they literally basically did that one day. Like, all the homeless people around where I live just disappeared. You're like, what happened to them? Where did they go? It's like,
Where was that, Echo
it's
Park?
very strange. What?
Where was that, Echo Park?
I'm in Studio City, like in the valley.
All
And
right.
one day it was like, oh, wow, okay, everybody's gone. This is really weird.
Skynet got them.
Yeah. Yeah, literally.
well, it's
They're
that,
selling them as their granola bars at Erewhon now.
Thank God.
it's this, like that. Politicians are going to do politician things, like it doesn't matter left or right. They're going to do shitty things, and it's either they're going to do shitty things and say they're doing the shitty thing and people are going to be outraged about it, or they're going to do the shitty thing and say they're doing the opposite of it and people are going to cheer for them.
Yeah.
um
Ben, you strike me, maybe my first impression is wrong because just because I saw like the surface level of your work online and stuff, and got the sort of like, I'm also someone who likes some of the things you like, and I tend towards pessimism sometimes. But you strike me as someone who actually is quite optimistic, despite having like interests in dark things and kind of like, you know that sort of stuff. Um, I was wondering if you could speak to that, of like what your view of the future is while we're talking about this stuff, because people might misinterpret your aesthetics as being aesthetics of darkness when in fact you seem to be rather positive as a person.
That's a really that's a kind thing to say and an astute thing to say. I'm very optimistic, and I am a very positive person. That I can't think of anybody in the world who I don't like. You know, there are people who I won't talk to because it's not a good idea. But I kind of like everyone, even if they're really awful and difficult. And I I'm too optimistic for sure. Like when, in the lead up to the war in, starting in Europe recently, right up to the last minute, I was like, no, it's going to be fine. I'm a bit like Pollyanna-ish. Too much, I think no, if you know that you're too much of a Pollyanna, it's good to be aware of that, and you can kind of base your decision making on that stuff. Like, I know I'm always too optimistic. If I start a business, I know it's going to be the most successful business ever, even if it's a fucking stupid idea, so I don't start businesses anymore. Do you know what I mean? And like I think my attraction to dark or difficult subject matter is just curiosity. It's not because I hate the world or anything like that. Do you know what I mean? I find it interesting. Also, I'm not interested in anything kind of dark or negative that doesn't have an aesthetic quality to it. So I'm really interested in primarily in aesthetics in the broadest sense of the world. Not of the word, not just superficial visual aesthetics, like creating feelings and all of that kind of stuff. So for me, there's I don't know, like
You said it before in a couple other things that I've seen where you talk about um, making the uncomfortable comfortable.
yeah, I don't know if I want to maybe I said that. I don't know if I want to make it comfortable. I think presenting the uncomfortable in a way that does something interesting to your brain. I did an interview with somebody and they were talking about limbic responses. I think I love what the images and music and film and media does to our brains. And the feelings that you can create, and it's David Cronenberg Videodrome type of stuff. Like, I love that feed of things that does something interesting to your brain, and the most joy I get is shit posting, putting stuff out into the world, and knowing that there are a bunch of people around the world being affected by that. They're like laughing, feeling sexy, feeling a bit repulsed or scared or whatever it is. But creating that feeling in other people is a joyous thing. If you're a comedian, it would be making them laugh. But for me, it's like the equivalent of that, but with kind of more complicated feelings. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you feel it's interesting. You talk about it, like feeling like a direct connection. It goes back to that network stuff you were talking about. Um, to speak a little bit more about the future of humanity. I mean, there's all sorts of talk going on right now about like global populations either exploding or collapsing. You can have as many articles about like the world's going to end because there's too many of us, or we're going to be fine because we've reached a peak and there's plenty of countries where the population is falling off. Um, where do you? You just said you don't really like talking about this future stuff, but is there is there a desire for you? I guess there's two questions. There's one is like I'd like to talk to you about legacy a little bit, and then the other one is I'd like to talk about like the ideas of immortality, and if you think there's a future of maybe if it's not like a physical type of thing, if there is like a digital type of immortality, and does that interest you? I guess that ties into legacy as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's speaking for myself. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm not into the idea of dying. It worried me when I was a kid. It used to keep me awake at night, and I think I'm definitely driven by creating some kind of legacy or being present in as many people's consciousness as possible. Digital legacy is interesting because I think when things existing digitally wasn't an option, legacies were buildings, or I have this wing of an art gallery named after me, or this book, or whatever it is. Now, we have the illusion. you know there's no guarantee that digital stuff will be around in 10 years, so maybe there's less potential for legacy than there ever has been. But at the same time, if people trying to create things like the blockchain. Like, we don't know if the Ethereum blockchain is going to outlive all of us and be the last thing. I don't know. It's either everything or nothing, really. Like, either we're creating digital legacies that will be immortal, or it's a complete illusion, and all of this stuff's going to be in an outdated format in 10 years, and none of us are going to have any legacy at all. We'll all be forgotten. But ultimately, I think I'm more interested in us uploading our consciousness into some kind of digital format and existing beyond our physical bodies. That's the real kind of prize of our lifetime, I think. And part of me thinks that that's going to be reserved for the super rich, and part of me thinks that that's how we'll be monetized in the future. These people aren't going to get old and die. You can make them immortal, and they'll be wage slaves forever, whatever it is. I don't know.
There's a great book about that called it's by Welbeck. I forget the title of that particular one, but it's like half of the book is just him existing in the cloud, like after his death.
I don't think I've read that one. Is it a newer one?
No, it's like one of the earlier ones, I think. Let me see.
Not the
I can look it up.
One, right?
I don't think so.
I don't remember that one. That was exactly what I was going to bring up. This idea of like uploading our consciousness to something where it's like there would be no discernible difference between what this is right now. Like the three.
Yeah, Possibility of an Island is the one.
Is that a digital consciousness though? It's a clone, I thought. Sorry,
he goes into he like exists in the cloud afterwards in this like nebulous.
Oh, at the very end, is that what happens?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like
shit.
Yeah, but
all right.
Well, but that's like, does that appeal to you, Ben? Because you're so interested in identity and how that like kind of would open up the idea that anyone could be anything.
I love the fact that we don't know what consciousness is. We still have no idea what consciousness really is, or sentience, or any of this stuff. People, in terms of AI is a misnomer. It's a very, very complex algorithm that's trained on a lot of human data. There's nothing truly intelligent about it, depending on how you define intelligence. People talking about artificial general intelligence is a bit more interesting, but I think they're all simulacra of genuine intelligence, certainly nothing to do with sentience. So, being as we don't know at all what consciousness is, this stuff is fascinating. Are we going to find out and then utilize it, or do you know what I mean? In terms of identity, like every time there's a new piece of AR hardware kit, or every time Meta announce something, I get excited because I'm like, this is going to be the new frontier of identity. We are going to break free of our physical form, and we'll be able to dictate how other people perceive us. It's going to be fucking great. And every single time I'm disappointed, like massively disappointed. The technology is not good enough. All of this stuff. Actually, I think, online, that's why I like being online so much, is that we are so in control of our identity. And, I don't know if you've ever had this experience of meeting an influencer, in real life, and then being like half the size and their face being wide as you expect it to be. They're like, it's a real thing. You know what I mean? It's really interesting. People are very much crafting their identities in cyberspace at the moment, but I'm more interested in the fantasy element. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's cool that you can face tune yourself and make yourself look tall or whatever it is. That's kind of boring. I'm more interested in the real, like, unlimited potentiality of it. But what's interesting to me is that when Instagram and Snapchat and everybody released AR filters, people were quite conservative with that stuff. Like, there's not, there's been a few kind of floaty makeup looks and a few quizzes and a few, but considering what people could have been doing, not that much has been done in terms of like augmenting ourselves online on an ongoing basis. So I think until we have like AR capabilities within our flesh, like implanted, operating all the time, I just don't see anything that interesting happening. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think we're going to be walking around with AR glasses on anytime soon, because who wants to wear glasses all the time if they don't have to? So
when we have those, I'm going to have the filter turned on. That's the Steve Buscemi eyes. So everyone I see has those. That'll be my first application of that, I think.
Amazing.
Well, I'm going to have something turned on that blocks you from doing that, because I don't want to.
That's fair. That's your right, in the
Exactly. That's
digital
going to be
age.
my right as a digital nomad or native, whatever.
AI,
Earthy being.
do not perceive me how I do not want to be perceived.
Yes, exactly.
That's a fascinating concept too.
It's actually what you just said is I find that really interesting because your immediate assumption is that you will be able to dictate, you will dictate how other people look.
How you
And I was
see,
thinking
yeah.
more the other way around, like we will all dictate how you see us. And that's a fundamental
Mm,
thing that we're going to come up with very soon is like, do I perceive people the way that they want to be perceived, or do I choose how to perceive them? Maybe I don't want any I don't want any French people in my world anymore at all. So I'm going to change all French language to English automatically and erase all French culture from my, field of vision at all times, just because I feel like it. Is that the way that we're going to go? Or is it going to be that everybody chooses how they're perceived and things become more diverse? Do you know what I mean? I think that's a
yeah.
fundamental paradox there.
Yeah, like what's your sovereignty as a person
Yeah.
when that exists? Those will be like some crazy
I think
legal
it'll be a combination of both, no? Like
gymnastics.
because they both come down to your own personal like how you're dictating it, right? And if you want to be perceived a certain way, you can have those filters on, but you won't get to decide how other people are able to, you know what I mean? Like unless they're plugged into the same network as you that uses the same, like your lion mane doesn't mesh with my filter, so you look like a giant unicorn instead because
Yeah, I
that's
mean
how
that
I
is
look.
the elephant in the room with all of this stuff. And I've been to so many tech conferences and worked with companies and worked on NFT projects and crypto projects or whatever. The elephant in the room with all of this is us agreeing what system we're going to all use, and that
Yeah,
we're nowhere near that. We have it for the World Wide Web to a degree, but we are nowhere near agreeing that for the future of augmented reality, augmented self identity. All of that shit. So I think this is all it's a bit of a moot point really, because it could be that we never agree and it ends up just being like owned by, if you pay your Meta subscription, then you can see everybody's fucking Funko Pop or whatever.
It's way lamer
You know what I mean?
than we can even imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, it brings up like weird just like deeper questions though about like how, because it's like you can see, no one can stop you right now from seeing anybody sexually or hatefully or in any way you choose to perceive them, and they don't even know that you're perceiving them that way. If you're not if you're not expressing that in some way, and so that's fascinating. But then we're getting kind of into the weeds there, like waxing philosophic.
I'm gonna put on my desexualization filter today so that nobody can perceive me in a sexual way. That's
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
going
I'm
to.
just a blob. I'm
Yeah.
just a gray blob
yeah. Do not
until you
perceive
meet
me.
the guy that really wants to fuck a gray blob.
Yeah, there will be. Yeah, there's always a guy that wants to fuck something.
They're out there.
Um, the, the, you sorry, I'm gonna go back a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Unless there's other things you want to say about the future of AI and AR. I'm sure we could talk about this for ages, but I wanted to talk to you about your own sort of personal creativity versus client creativity. You exist in both worlds, and you do stuff independently, like you've published your own books, and you obviously have your own communities that you curate and define the audiences of through your content that you put out there. But is there a different way that you think when you're presented with like a client brief, say, than when you're just free form, freewheeling, doing it on your own?
No, I really like working with clients. I don't like working alone. The only thing I do alone is kind of what you might call research or browsing or shit posting or whatever. So I run all of my social media accounts on my own, apart from Discord mods, and that's the only thing that I do on my own. Everything else, I would say, I never do alone deliberately. Like I love working in teams, and I think when it comes to client stuff, firstly, nobody's going to employ me unless they want me doing my thing, because if you want like a commercial advert director or music video director or whatever, there are a lot of them who aren't as challenging as me. So do you know what I mean? I think by the
Yeah.
time people come to me, like I've had a couple of conversations today about really interesting commercial stuff. Those people know my work, and they're not going to be surprised about you know. I also have, you know, I have a degree of professionality because I've been doing this for a long time, so I don't come back to people with stupid ideas, because you know I live in the real world. And like, I would say that anything I do with clients is a crystallization of whatever I've been researching and talking about and whatever at that time. So everything I do is informed by the general sort of, there's like a baseline of me absorbing culture and having thoughts and having these conversations and posting stuff that happens all the time. And then those commercial things are like crystallized moments of that are turned into something that's a bit more of a big project. Do you know what I mean? But it's never like, it's not coming out of nowhere. It's coming out
Right.
of constant sort of, I would say low level, but it's not low level. I spend like 8 hours a day doing it. Like being online and absorbing
Yeah.
culture. So I would say, yeah. Does that answer that question?
It does. I mean, it's I kind of love that way of thinking about it. That there's no filter between the two. Like your work is your research. Not sorry, I didn't mean to put that in bunny ears, but
Yeah, sure.
the the work is the research, and there is value in sort of um, absorbing all that material, an invaluable part of it that you then turn into the work for your clients, right?
I th-
Um,
that's like, just to pause on that for a moment. I think for anybody who's listening in the creative fields, I've had to work very hard personally to understand that that's not a bonus thing. Do you know what I mean? That is where everything comes from. So all of my value comes from that time that I spend reading, watching things, you know, flicking through stuff, whatever it is. Without that, it's not. It's. I think that we are. Maybe it's the sort of capitalist society, whatever the fuck it is that we live in. You know, that's seen as like a waste of time or a bonus thing. There are jobs I do now where people have to do the reading for the job outside of work hours. It's like, no, the reading is the fucking work. If these people aren't read into this subject, you're going to get shit work. And I personally
right.
think that most workplaces should have a reading hour at the beginning of the day. Like, I bang on about this a lot. Like, go into work and read everything you need to read solidly, and then do the rest of your work. You know, that should be the foundation of stuff. Not like, oh, you know, I didn't have time to actually educate myself on this subject, but I'm going to make some work about it anyway. It's
Right.
fucking wild.
I'm gonna
It's
wing it.
something that has really gotten lost on creative professions outside, in my experience, outside of people who work in fashion and fine art, where it's kind of always been like a part of being an artist, to be either living or doing crazy shit or reading profusely or consuming imagery, consuming culture, consuming music and whatever aesthetic material or emotional material, whether it's like they do it in different ways. You know, maybe it's a guy who he goes out and he has 25 different affairs because that's where he sucks all his juices from, you know, emotionally to create some sort of, but it's like, or you're in the library reading, you're in the library reading, every piece of whatever that's ever existed or something. But it's funny how unless you're in these like specific fine art areas, or like I know people in fashion who understand that, or like maybe people in film, but like creatives now who get employed by companies to do creative work, there's no allowance of that, and it's really kind of it explains a lot about some of the horrible aesthetic choices that seem to be made in certain realms these days.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking to Antoine D'Agata recently, who I think is definitely one of my favorite artists of all time, and he has, his life experience is very clearly represented in the work that he produces. Do you know what I mean? And it's, you could not make that work if you didn't live the way that he lives. You know what I mean? And there's nothing like, I'm not condoning it or condemning it or whatever it is, but that's for me the most clear example. Francis Bacon as well, a few other people. The
That's
most
what
clear
just popped
example.
into my head when you were saying
Yeah,
that.
I
Like,
mean, they're like, it's a very, very clear, visual link between what they're exposing themselves to in their life and their inner world, and then what they put onto the canvas or what they shoot. And like, that is the same for everybody. It's not, those aren't rare exceptions. It's the same for everyone. So I think like, when you said about, I don't know, so I'm a bit, I have mixed feelings about this. I was listening to a radio show yesterday where it was a bunch of comedians talking about Marvin Gaye, Marvin Gaye as a musician, sort of talking about whether or not he was like evil or a genius. It's this radio format thing we have here where they talk about like all the good and bad things that an amazing creative person did. And the person who was presenting was like, they don't believe this thing that you have to be mentally disturbed or distressed or whatever to make good art. And I agree with that to a degree, but I personally, I will sleep deprive myself and look at challenging things, and I put myself through a lot of experiences in life, which I don't have to, in order to give myself insight, which then informs my work. And I have to say that, personally, I will deliberately, semi-deliberately, I don't know, choice and free will is a very flexible concept in this case, but sometimes I will disturb myself very deliberately so that I get into a certain way of thinking. And do you know what I mean? I don't agree that you can just be like Joe Blogg's average, watching whatever standard Netflix shit everyone else does and never doing anything interesting and magically come up with incredible things. In my experience, all of the creative people I've ever worked with have had a degree of mental distress at some point, and and interesting experiences, and above all, a massive level of curiosity about the world. Everybody I know who's successful, like genuinely successful, has a like insatiable curiosity about something. And whenever I teach people, like younger people, if you're not curious about the world, you're not going anywhere as a creative person. Do you know what I mean? And that curiosity can be about anything, though. It doesn't have to be about like grand themes or science or technology or whatever. It can be anything, but if you don't have it, I don't see how you're going to do anything that interesting. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That
Yeah.
exact thing is something that I used to worry about all the time. Is when I was in art college, I'd see these people who thought in a way that I was like, I admired the way that they thought about the world. And they would be whatever, just like have been fucked up from using drugs for years, or have been fucked up from whatever trauma or car accident they were in, or whatever it was. And I used to like think that I was not ready. Like I remember having the thought that I just wasn't prepared to make things creatively because I hadn't lived long enough, or I hadn't been fucked up enough at the time. And it comes to be that I am fucked up in my own way. That's that's neither here nor there. But there is this. I agree with you that there is like this, not a presupposition, but like a pre. What am I trying? What's the word I'm looking for? It's like a
Presumption.
prerequisite for having any kind of influential creative input into the world, is that you're coming at it from a place not necessarily of pain, but of having gone through pain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think pain is a part of the human experience, and it's quite, it's hard to know. For example, it's hard to know what pleasure is without pain because there are dialectics. So, we define everything by what it's not. And if you've never been really, really poor, you don't know what that feels like. Do you know what I mean? So having money is not interesting. It's like, yeah, I have money. Of course I have money. Once you've had
Yeah.
to really struggle and work, then you're like, oh, actually, like now I'm grateful to have money because I know what it's like to feel poor. I think it's the same with pain and love and loss and all of those things. Like, if you've never been in love, you don't know what it's like to have your heart broken, all of this stuff. I think it's just the full breadth of human experience which informs creativity. I don't think that you necessarily have to be. I know some really incredible creative people who've not been through very difficult things. I don't think that's true at all. So, there is all. I have to say there is that illusion that you have to have been like, maybe being a heroin addict is helpful or whatever. I think that's a lie, a mean lie.
Yeah.
Like, I think like that there is a degree of like being able to look at the world in an interesting way that good creative people have, but I don't think it has to be informed by blunt force trauma or heroin addiction or whatever.
Yeah,
You guys
it's
see
unfortunate that young people can make that. It can be hard when you're young to make that distinction, because when you want so badly to like make something interesting or be recognized for something, but it's more about like how much material is there in the feeder, like in the hopper, that's being refined into whatever it is that you're spitting out. It could be your material, could be that you watched. I mean, I'm a big David Foster Wallace fan, and it's like obviously a tortured individual, but also so much of his best writing came from just having consumed thousands of hours of bad American television and watched hundreds of hours of tennis matches and done things like this where it's more about just having life experience and perspective and just having a perspective. But if you spend all your time sitting there, if you spend all your time trying to get the perfect line or trying to, get the perfect like lighting on your photo or doing some technical task for your craft and you're not actually like living, then it's going to, I mean, you see that online with a lot of digital art where obviously extremely technically talented. I think of metal too, where you have extremely technical, some extremely technical music that has no soul because it's obvious that these, people have spent all their time working on the technique rather than living,
Which brings us back to the fears about AI and creativity is that, I think there's something in us that resonates when we meet human experience, like a valuable piece of human experience. And that for me is what, the thing that makes good metal or good whatever is detecting that there's something in there that feels human, that resonates with
Mm-hmm.
me, and that's, I don't think that's going anywhere.
No.
But yeah. I don't know. What were we talking about?
I got so into all this technical, like we were talking about pain as a prerequisite for creativity.
Yeah, kind of obsessed. I think like creative process is super interesting. I have to say that, there's an artist, a British artist. I'm not going to, I don't like being rude about people, so I won't say who it is, but a very famous British artist who I really like. And he was on the radio, he's a sort of well-loved person, very successful, one of the big artists of our generation. And he was on the radio saying, I'm just a normal bloke. I'm just an average geezer, just a standard man. I was like, you're not, though. Do you know what I mean? That's a lie. And this particular person dresses in a very eccentric way, and and is exceptionally talented. I'm like, you're kind of devaluing what you do, and like, it's a lie to say that anyone can do this as well. I think that's the other thing about creativity, and as it relates to artificial intelligence and whatever, is that if anybody could do stuff, there would be nothing special about it. The thing that's special is that there are these people like David Lynch, who I really like, or Cronenberg or whatever. There's something very special about them. If everybody was David Cronenberg, it would be so tedious. Do you know what I mean? I don't want all human beings to be equally inspiring. Actually, like, you can find inspiring things in all human beings, but I think that there's something we should appreciate people who have special talents. Do you know? I think there's nothing to be ashamed of there.
That goes back to that AI thing or the AR thing about like how you want to be perceived versus how you're perceived, right? Like that artist, any old geezer, he wants you to see him as just the regular guy on the block who's not dressing eccentrically, even though he is dressing eccentrically. And even though he does all these like wild things, he wants you to see him as just a builder who's on his way to a job site or whatever it is, right?
I think he was trying to democratize art, which is a good, I know he was trying to democratize art and to, maybe to erase some class boundaries, which is a really good thing to do, I'm sure. But maybe there is another part of us, like, I don't know about you too, but there's a part of me that's like, I don't want people to think I'm a weirdo or different. I want to be like I want to be. I don't take any real joy a lot of the time in being, sometimes when people say like, oh, you're a fucking weirdo, I was like, oh, that actually hurts. I'm actually not that. I'm kind of quite normal. If you meet me, I'm quite normal. I'm like a polite, regular, non-chaotic person. But I think sometimes people see my like output and they're like, I've met people and they've been like, oh, I thought you were going to be like really fucking unhinged. I'm like, I'm not unhinged.
Welcome to my twisted mind.
Yeah. Buckle up, it's gonna be crazy. No,
I like that phenomenon of famous people, like the same drive that would cause an ordinary person to sort of go on that journey to become super famous. Once they're famous, then they become obsessed with the journey back to like
Yeah,
normalcy or the mundane. That's always been interesting.
that's really interesting. I love that. And honestly, like, I think a lot of this also boils down to like gratitude in life. Like I think people sort of forget what the prize is for this stuff. The prize is doing something that is fulfilling. It's not like fame in and of itself is never seems that fulfilling. Being massively wealthy, isn't it? It's like what are you going to do with that? How is that going to enrich you? And I was going to say some really tacky, cheesy shit there. I'm not going to, but like I think it is
We've
very
never been
easy.
opposed to that on this podcast. You can if you want.
Well, the thing that I talk about mental health online a lot because I'm very interested in how the sort of general psychiatric model and how much bullshit there is surrounding that and how that's being weaponized by tech companies and pharmaceutical companies in the US and all sorts of stuff. But I think that the thing that people are I never ever hear people talk about the value of looking out for other people, helping others, altruism, like helping in your community, not like activism, not going on a fucking protest, like just going and like helping people in your community. Like that, it's such a massive thing. And like the only thing that makes me feel okay in life, do you know what I mean? Like the creativity stuff's great and like I live for it. And when things, when I do a project for somebody and it goes out in public and everybody loves it, that's great. But honestly, one of the most depressed some of the most depressed feeling I've ever had was I did a thing for the 1975. They played at the O2 Arena, which is massive. There were like 30,000 people there waving their phones, and all of our work was up on monitors everywhere. It was fucking amazing. And like walking out of that, I was just like, I don't want to kill someone. Like I feel fucking terrible. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like it's not going to get much better than that. Do you know what I mean? There is no commercial job for a pop band that can be much bigger than that. We've done the biggest festival stage in the world, some of the biggest venues. Like there isn't anywhere to go from there, and there's something quite sad about that. The thing that there's no amount of chasing those successes that will make you happy. But when I go and do like bits of community work or whatever, I always feel better about myself. And I think why are people so determined to talk about their own diagnoses and their own mental health conditions and their problems and being really really granular about identifying exactly what's wrong with them and what they identify as and blah blah blah? It's like look out at other people, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
stop looking in and look out. And I think that is always the source of comfort and healing and all of those good things. But there's just nothing cool about that. You can't monetize that. If you're fucking Meta or whatever, you can't. Nobody can monetize just like being nice to people and like
Community,
Well,
yeah.
yeah.
It's
that's
a
what
beautiful sentiment, yeah.
this goes straight back to what you were talking about before about just like that when you find the real connection, when there is a thing that resonates with us when we see something or when we hear something, we can recognize the human kind of element to it. That thing will never be able to be replicated because there's an essence there that is
Mm.
ethereal almost, right? It's not tangible and it is not monetizable, right?
It's like a bridge, I guess if somebody, another way of looking at what you said is that if somebody writes a song and you listen to the song is a bridge between them and you. And the important thing is that they exist, like they're a real person and you're receiving the thing through the medium of song. If you remove the other person, it becomes AI or whatever. That loses all meaning. I think the song, do you know what I mean about all of this stuff? Like if I post something and it makes somebody laugh across the other side of the world, they know that I've done it and I know that they've laughed because they've told me, and we share a tiny little moment, like a little dopamine hit. But I think
Yeah.
that's nice. Do you know what I mean? I think there's something really nice about those little interactions. And I think we can be cynical about the internet and social media. There's actually something very beautiful about all of that as well. And like I've talked about it before. When I was a kid, if you wanted to meet like-minded people, you wrote to like there were personal ads in the back of music magazines, and you'd like write to pen friends and like hope they would write back. And we both like Sisters of Mercy or Alien Sex Fiend or whatever, and like maybe we'll become pen friends. Like now, if you're some weird kid in a small town, you can easily connect with other weird kids around the world. And I think there's something amazing about all of this stuff that we're kind of lost in all the cynicism of it. But
Yeah, you can find your niche anywhere, right? Like
yeah, and it's I think that's a really good thing. It's that's why Tumblr was so cool. you know.
And it's, I mean, it's like, it's so loud the way people use it to break each other down, but then it's like, just as much as that, you go on every day and you find everybody beefing each other up and enjoying
Yeah,
comment
it's
sections
not
and
too hard to
sharing
avoid the
things.
negative stuff. Like, I think,
Yeah.
when people have really relentlessly negative experiences of the internet, like especially Twitter, for example, like I just don't use it. Like, I don't use Twitter because
Yeah.
everyone's a cunt on Twitter. Like, people are
It's, dude,
horrible.
it's the worst. Oh
So
my
just,
God.
so just go somewhere else. It's like
Yeah.
going to a bar where everyone's abusive to you over and over again, and it's being like, oh, you know,
Don't go there.
it's so toxic.
Yeah.
Just
Bar is exhausting.
I was like,
Yeah. I hate this bar that I go to every day for 8 hours.
Yeah, all
exactly.
this like the idea that it has to be regulated or whatever by governments. It's
Oh,
like just don't fucking use it. I don't know. Then no
I
one's
Yeah. How
gonna
about
know.
you? Yeah. Like regulate your own self, you know?
What do you think? What do you guys think about Twitter since Elon took over? Honestly, like
I
I
honestly,
don't
don't
use it
use Twitter.
either, you
I
know?
don't
Like,
like. I never used Twitter, so I never really understood the appeal of it. And it's interesting to view as just like this kind of microcosmo of whatever. It's like it's a metaphor for society's collapse or whatever, or it's a metaphor for an extinction, or it's a metaphor for whatever. It's interesting to look at in that way, but I don't see the I still I the world existed before Twitter and the world is going to exist after Twitter. It's not gonna.
the only people I know who Twitter hasn't broken their brain and made their life worse are comedians,
Hmm.
because something about the short format of having to play with the brevity and the word element of it, that medium is just perfect for comedians. And they're the only ones that I feel like, I mean, plenty of comedians go on Twitter and get sucked into bullshit and lose their mind or whatever. But it's like, it's an awesome, there's some awesome, I mean, there's comedians who built their entire careers, like really, really significant careers, just on Twitter. You know?
Yeah, good for them. I think like yesterday, I think they announced that you have to be like a blue check subscription person for your stuff
Yeah,
to get recommended, and that all of the sort of media erupted with like, oh, this is such bullshit and it's not going to help anything. In my view, hot take, Twitter has definitely not got worse since Elon took over at all. And I think that they keep doing these things and making these announcements. I'm like, it seems fine. Like, it seems better than it was.
I
There
mean,
are
it
like
is what it is.
it's not going to
far
right. It's not going to change that drastically, because at the end of the day, it's just a social network of people
it's
posting
not going to change
short
that drastically, but
messages.
also it's really interesting to see how much everyone fucking hates him being there. Like, I'm not a big Elon Musk
Yeah,
fan at all, but I'm like, ostensibly, it just seems fine. Like, it's not collapsing. People can be a bit more free to say stuff, and it's not. I don't know. I was very interested to see them saying that. Only verified stuff appearing in feeds is not going to help fight disinformation. I was like, that's not. I don't agree with that. Do you mean? I think if you're
yeah.
currently operating a platform where anyone can deploy 20,000 bots to spread messages, how is it not going to help to only spread things that are where people are paying for a subscription? It's amazing how against it everybody is at like Wired magazine and Wall Street Journal and the Economist and do you know what I mean? Interesting. I think it's fine.
Now that there's like norms of the technological revolution and all these things that we rely on, it's funny how like people are still so resistant to anything changing. Even
Yeah.
with the AI, people are like, no, we can't have this. We can't have Twitter change. We can't have, it's funny.
Well, it's weird. I mean, it's a part of that. Like the internet used to, so we'll wrap things up shortly here, Ben. Sorry, but the internet used to be like when I was a kid, there was a million websites. There are still a million websites, but really now there's like 5 websites, right? That people don't know how to even use the internet anymore. They don't understand that like you can go directly to a website. You don't have to go to some aggregate feed to find information or to find just the headline of something. And there's a whole generation of kids that's all they've grown up on is just this, like they've grown up on this aggregate version of the internet. Whereas what it started as was this way more free formed thing. And there is a bit, it's like the aggregate form is starting to collapse a little bit, but there is a base below that that was perfectly fine. It still worked, and people are freaking out because it's shareholders' money being lost or whatever it is. It's not necessarily like the information is still going to be there, and the accessibility to the information is going to be there. It's just how that information is delivered might shift slightly, but people are losing their minds because, the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post, because they have huge vested interests, are telling people you should be losing your minds over this, and then people are like, oh fuck, I guess I gotta lose my fucking mind.
Well, if you don't receive all of your information through blue check verified Wall Street Journal journalists, then you could be listening to anything.
Yeah, and then who
I
knows
mean,
what you're gonna
who fucking knows?
You could be,
Misinformation.
you could
might
be believing untruths.
untruths, fake news.
Untruths are everywhere.
All sorts of stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's important that we keep everything channeled through a very homogenized worldview of neoliberal American tech companies.
Otherwise, we're all going to start believing that spaghetti grows on trees or whatever.
Anything could happen.
Do you remember? Have you ever seen that film? It was like a BBC produced. Like, we studied that in film school eons ago.
Ben, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, man.
It's a pleasure. Very nice to speak to you both, and I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Is there anything you want to plug right now? You've got an amazing documentary series you're putting out.
Oh yeah. Everybody who's listening to this, or the thousands of people listening to this podcast, Ditto Nation, go to YouTube and search Ditto Nation, and I'm doing a monthly documentary series. Episode 3 is coming out this month. It's about diagnosis culture, so the sort of weaponization of the psychiatric model by tech companies. As I've said, previous one was about 3D printed guns. One before that was about our sense of identity within current technology. And yeah, it's a monthly documentary. There's a Patreon, and follow me on Instagram, Ben_Ditto. I'm sure you already do. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks so much, Ben. It's been a pleasure.
Nice to see you both.